We live in a world where headlines are written to grab attention rather than to clarify. Spin, selective framing, and deliberate distraction often cloud the truth, leaving people polarised, misinformed, or simply exhausted by the noise.
Fact and Friction was born out of the need to slow down, strip away the theatre of contemporary media, and examine what's really going on when narratives clash.
Every episode will dive into the points of tension, the friction, where fact meets spin, where evidence collides with ideology, and where competing truths are put to the test.
Our purpose isn't to lecture or to preach. Often it won't even get to the ground truth, but to unpick, challenge, and illuminate.
So we aim to help you, our listener, to see through the haze of modern media, offering you clarity without oversimplification, and provide a balanced perspective that offers every side of the argument. So let's get to the episode.
Hello, Harry, and
Hey, Sean.
welcome already to the second edition of Fact and Friction. If you recall, on the last one, we talked about how big tech platforms don't just guide us towards specific content, but how they keep us there.
Yeah, attention
The
engine.
social attention engine, exactly that.
Yeah.
So now we sprinkled this with a little bit of advance warning about what we're calling rabbit holes.
Yep.
So these are algorithms that accelerate users towards more emotional, more sensational, and more extreme content, because that's what increases engagement. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. It's something that we've all experienced, but we've never really thought about it, probably.
Yeah, I think we've all been there, Sean. I mean, I can tell you that on more occasions than I care to think about. The one video I watched became 3, that becomes 8, and suddenly I'm deep into content that I never planned to watch in the first place.
Yeah, and that all feels very, very natural, actually. You're just following your curiosity, if you like.
Yeah.
But again, back to a question that we have mentioned before. Are you really choosing that journey?
Yeah.
Or is it something that's quietly guiding you along?
And of course, as we said last time, Sean, it's guiding you not because it has an objective in mind about where it's guiding you. It just wants you to stay. It just doesn't want you to leave, because more time on the platform is better than less.
Indeed. Now, just before that, I think we're probably worth having a look at definitions, because if you remember last time I mentioned, something that I've always been conscious of: filter bubbles and echo chambers.
Yeah. So when we talked about filter bubbling, we talked about the fact that when I've decided I like this but not that, I will choose the former over the latter. I will always try and find more content of things that I've decided I like, and I will exclude things that I don't like. Well, that makes common sense, right? But the algorithms, to some extent, doing that for you as well.
Yeah, absolutely that. And yeah, it's the algorithms that are automatically personalising what you see, is effectively what you said, based on your past activity and behaviour. And again, it's what we were talking about before. They track your clicks, likes, and loiter time.
Yeah.
So you're increasingly shown content that aligns with your preferences or interesting. And you're not given opposing views that are wrong or different to what you think. You just stop seeing them.
Yeah.
Now, a good example of that would be shopping. Back to the shopping thing.
Mm-hmm.
How many times have you looked at something, camera or something, and then from then on, for the next 3 weeks, all you get in terms of the adverts is that same sort of thing. So that's a very basic example of it.
Yeah.
It's probably worth saying that that's different from an echo chamber, which is more of a social and cultural phenomenon. And that happens really when you actively and deliberately interact with others who share your beliefs or opinions, and therefore reject others.
Yeah.
So you choosing it in this case and help reinforce it. And the two often work together, actually. The algorithms create the filter bubble, so you can see less opposing content. Communities form inside that bubble, with individuals reinforcing each other's views, and then echo chambers form. That is the on-ramp to rabbit holing that is an altogether more invasive experience.
Yeah. And just before we go into the rabbit holing definition and look at that specifically, because that's what this episode's about, I think it's also worth just mentioning, and maybe we'll come back to this in a future episode, why is it we stay inside our echo chamber even when we are presented with opposing views. And that's a topic we can come back to another time. But there is a mechanism at play there which we need to talk about another time for sure.
Yep, absolutely.
So rabbit holing then.
So rabbit holing. So the platforms no longer consistently keep you inside that filter bubble we just talked about. It's too simplistic for the contemporary attention economy, if you like to think of it that way. Now the algorithms are written to escalate and intensify the experience for the explicit purpose of keeping you engaged. So a rabbit hole is when a platform learns what catches your attention and continually feeds you, and this is the key piece, more intense, surprising, emotional or extreme versions of that content.
Yeah, and that's the thing we talked about in the last episode. We talked about the attention engine, the introduction of emotion as a trigger to want to do more, to stay, to have more and more time spent on the platform. Now, I think what you're saying is that rabbit holing is basically working to amplify that emotion. It's giving you a big hit of emotion. It's found something you're going to be interested in, and it keeps you there by using an emotional quotient that's increasing.
Absolutely, very much so.
So is it worth saying though that at the beginning of this process, the rabbit holing is really working on your curiosity, getting you inside the rabbit hole to start with? Because I mean, let's be clear, if it brings a series of random topics in front of you, they're random topics, but yet that one's caught my eye, it's caught my curiosity. It goes back to my very first example from episode 1, the 1982 rebuilding a tractor idea. For me, I was curious about it. Now, just parking the tractor for a second, getting back to the point, my curiosity is what got me into the mouth of the rabbit hole. What got me go down into a rabbit hole, I guess, and stayed in there and started burrowing deeper and deeper, is what you're saying is the emotion gets more and more intense. It's pulling me further and further in.
Absolutely, that's exactly it, actually. Although I'm not sure how emotional you get about creating a tractor. Maybe you do. Maybe it's something that really
I wiped
really
a
does
tear.
get you.
I wiped a tear from the corner of my eye
when it didn't work. But that's exactly it. And it's knowing, without getting too deep too quickly, it's knowing that is happening to you, which is the important bit. But you're right. You don't necessarily. It's back to again what we were speaking before. You don't necessarily know what you're going to be curious about until it hits you.
Yeah.
But that's when the process starts. It's that extra pause and the going back to it, all the rest of it. And that's the start of that rabbit holing process.
So the rabbit holing then gets that curiosity trigger. It then gives you more of the same because it appears to have caught your attention, but it keeps your attention now by you're saying it's increasing the emotional content. It's more shocking, more divisive, more something that drives emotion.
Exactly it. And it doesn't have to be a negative emotion either. It can be, deep joy. It could be something you really, but generally it will be something that makes you slightly cross.
But it sounds like what you're saying is that it's not manipulative. It's not driving the conversation to a specific end. It's helping you feel as though it's more of a discovery process. You're seeing a natural progression. And one of the things I've noticed with a lot of these rabbit holes is that the next thing I see feels like a natural progression. It doesn't feel like it's jumping around. It feels like a stepped process going from left to right to back again and keep moving forward. It doesn't feel like it's manipulative.
I think that's the subtlety. And it's knowing when it does feel manipulative.
Yeah.
And again, without going right to the end of the podcast, that awareness of what's happening to you is really critical in this.
Right.
Because it is human nature, no question. We did a little bit of work on the psychology of this, that something that does pique you emotionally, you are going to stay on it and you're going to want to know more about it, and it's just going to keep feeding you.
Yeah. So in other words, the filter bubbling sounds like a verb, to have a filter bubble, echo chamber created, that's true, but it's not the complete story anymore, is what you're saying. Now we've got this rabbit hole that's about emotional content to pull you further and further down into a topic. So it's basically taking curiosity and escalating it. It's driving the process. So what we're looking at now is a platform that's optimized for engagement is driving further engagement by learning what triggers you, noticing the clicks, the watch time, the pauses, etc., or the rewatches, and then content that keeps you watching being promoted more widely. But critically, the novelty, the surprise, the slightly more extreme content is what's actually driving this conversation now. It's driving this this channel that you're on. That I think is what you're describing as rabbit holing.
Absolutely right. Yeah. So in a nutshell, the algorithms, they don't just repeat what you like; they escalate to keep you interested.
All right. So why does this happen? What is it about this that is key to the mechanism at play? Why is it doing it? Because at the end of the day, the system's not doing it for anything other than trying to keep you in the app. Well, actually, it is. There's an economic reason, right? I mean, it's being driven by a particular purpose.
Absolutely. It's, the big providers, and I'm not saying that they're all big bad people, but the more that you are engaged, the longer you spend, the more chance that, well, the more revenue they make, but the more chance you have of just keeping on going. And so this is when the 2 minutes turns into 10, turns into an hour, and getting more and more emotionally engaged all the time, because emotion does keep you engaged just by its own nature.
So essentially there is an economic driver from the producers of this algorithm to keep you more engaged. And that economics, by the way, the economics of attention is something we'll talk about on another podcast, because there is a very specific model at play there, which I think helps you understand why the system's working the way it does and why it cares so much about your attention. But we'll come back to that later. So if the economics are about keeping you online and the platforms are optimized to keep you online, more time spent, more interaction, and the dramatic, surprising novel is the bit that brings in the emotional, drags you deeper and deeper into it. What we want to try and make sure is that we recognize these loops that you're starting to get into, these momentum loops we talked about in the last podcast, because that's really what you're talking about here. It's accelerating the momentum loop by an emotional quotient that's actually driving the behavior. I want to see more. I'm more curious. This escalation of curiosity.
Yeah, and that really is one of the real difficulties, because you're emotionally engaged. You want to stay engaged, because human nature being what it is, it likes some sort of emotional input. And so, and I know we're going to talk about this, about what do you do about it, is quite difficult, because you might want to stay in that rabbit hole, if you like, which just takes you further and further down. Now, just so I don't forget it, there is a difference, but there's a relationship between the algorithms taking into that for their own sake, and then the sort of more nefarious elements of disinformation campaigns, which we will talk about on another episode, where that is using that rabbit holing model to actually accelerate and enhance what it's saying. So it's not actually creating them, but it's actually feeding off that. We'll park that for another time.
I think that's a great example, Sean, of a case study we need to come back to later, because what I sense in this conversation so far, and it is an extension of the first episode, is for the user of this platform, the listener to this podcast, to recognize the rising emotion that's going on in this rabbit holing experience. An example that I would give you from my own experience in recent months, I suspect some of the listeners will have seen these videos. It's videos of people who have been allegedly captured on doorbells with cameras.
Yes.
And they run to the door to, quote, steal a box.
Yes.
And then the box explodes. Right? Now, the first video you see, you think, yeah, that serves them right, the thieving so-and-so.
Yep.
Right? And then later, you see the videos being replayed. Because, of course, you've watched that video. It's going to play more of those videos for you. But later, the videos are now of the individual screaming at the camera, how dare you do this to me? This is outrageous. I'm going to sue you. Which is a heightening of the emotion involved in the video. But my reaction to that is, well, it serves you right. So I'm now being pulled into the next set of videos, which is where it gets even more aggressive, and off it goes. And that's a rabbit hole.
That's a really good example, actually. It is a good example, because it takes something that's, everyone's going to say, oh, that's interesting. And I've done exactly the same with that. And some of the extreme ones, which, and then it's probably worth mentioning the misinformation side of things as well. But, by the end, you're thinking, that's great, they've got their camera, but is that real? When it blows up in the car and they're, they're really, really
so you begin to wonder. But the point for me there is, I'm watching a video about somebody doing something that I think is bad, stealing.
Yeah.
I have an emotional reaction to that. I want to see more of that. I want to see more retribution.
Yeah.
More for these wicked people. I get that feed telling me, there we are, see, we've got more of these horrible people caught. And then we get the reaction of the people, and then the policeman saying, no, madam, I think you'll find that you stealing a box means you're in the wrong place and all that. And then you start to watch more and more. And now it's the individual that's doing something really strange. Hang on a sec, why is a camera on the porch now, not from the camera from the doorbell? Oh, I see what's happened. I have been sucked into a rabbit hole.
Yeah.
I'm now watching
Yeah.
made up videos, which are, to your point, disinformation.
Yeah.
Now, the story behind that is it's an emotional driver that got me to spend way too much time watching videos of cardboard boxes blowing up on the porch. Right?
Indeed.
That's what drove it. And that's rabbit holing.
Yeah. And there's a more insidious version of that as well. Again, examples. You know, this is very much an apolitical. We don't do politics.
Sure.
And no one will ever know our
We've
politics.
both been the victim of politics our entire
We
life,
have,
if you like.
absolutely right. But you could go on something that is very simple, like, you know, is a particular politician ill? And you know, it happens with a lot of the bad guys all the time. You know, it's almost a 101 in the intelligence world, right? Despot, oh yeah, he's ill, he's gonna die in a few. Never the case, but anyway. But if you type something like that in there, very quickly it will probably give you two options of the argument. Yes, they're really ill, they haven't got long to live, or, you know, no, move on. But of course, yes, they've got long to, it was going to pique your interest.
Yeah.
And it doesn't take long, again, probably 4 or 5 clips, where you've got a compelling case that this person is absolutely on their death's deathbed. Because that's what's made you emotional. Maybe you want to see that subconsciously, I don't know. Or maybe it's horrified you, but it takes you more down that route. So this is where it slightly gets a bit worrying from my perspective, because even though it's not saying, right, I want you to believe this, it's really reinforcing maybe your natural instinct, but maybe you've just clicked half a second longer on something and takes you down a certain way. This is now how I think. And
not wishing to jump into this topic now, because it is one definitely future, herein lies the source of conspiracy theories.
Indeed, absolutely.
This is, by the way, not the only source, but this is the mechanics that are behind many of the strange beliefs that people are welded to about the way the world works, the way the medical system works, or whatever it might be. But again, I'm well off track there. Let's move on. So let's start moving, Sean, as we want to do in these podcasts, to a place where we start to understand what we're seeing, how to recognize what we're seeing, and then what to do about it.
Yeah, indeed. So I think we've already mentioned the first one, but it's a really key indicator for me is that the content recommendations you've got on any different subject, doesn't really matter what it is, they just become increasingly dramatic or specific even.
Yeah. So that, I think, coupled with the fact that you've forgotten why you first came into the app, and remember what you said from the last time, you might just be in the app because you're bored and just fancy just filling some time while sitting on the train, scrolling through. But if something then attracts your attention and it becomes urgent, you feel like, I really am fascinated, I'm really keen to know more about it, all of a sudden, out of your stupor, sitting on the train on the way to work in the morning, the way home, there is a signal there which you need to be aware of, that you've suddenly become caught by something. Now, that might be something you search for, well and good, or was it something that the algorithm put in front of you? And if it's the latter, you should notice that reaction and be aware that it's now going to try and find more and more logical or feeling logical, but also more emotional things to look at. So this is fundamentally what I think rabbit holing is about, is this progression, this escalation of curiosity by using emotion. And what I want to do now, as ever we're going to try and do with this podcast, is give some guidance on how you start to slow this down, how you add some friction into the rabbit holing process that's going on. So a couple of top tips for the listener to think about. When the tool you're using, the app you're using, makes a recommendation, posts things around the topic you've looked at that might seem interested, listeners also listen to this, readers also read this kind of stuff around the things. Pause before you look at the next recommendation. Notice patterns of recommendations rather than individual posts. What is it trying to do in terms of escalating my curiosity? What's it trying to do in terms of escalating the emotion? If you can see that happening, then you can begin to take some control within the moment on the app.
Absolutely. So what we're really talking about is interrupting that feedback loop. So putting a blocker in there doesn't need to be a blocker. So, and that might be breaking the pattern. So just reset your feed. I think you mentioned it on a previous one where you just put some random topics in, which just takes you out there, and it might take you down a rabbit hole in another place, but it takes a while to get that emotional engagement with it. When you're doing something like, slightly more deliberate stuff, curate your feeds. So don't go on whichever, Instagram, whatever, and just let it watch. Just say, right, I am interested in, and I don't know if Instagram does this, but certainly some of them, YouTube or whatever.
Through the search bar, you can
you go, right, okay, I want to be fed on this sort of thing. Now, that doesn't necessarily stop you going down a rabbit hole in the end, but at least you're in control of what it is you're interested in.
Right, and it's the thing that you are now setting the direction, the vector that it's taking you on. So one of the things you might wish to consider, and I do recognise, by the way, that at the end of the day, when you are tired, bored, and got nothing to do for 45 minutes, you're stuck on a train, this might not seem like an easy thing to do. But actually, why not try this? Set a clear intention before you open the platform. I am going to open this platform because I want to know about X, and X can be anything that comes to mind at that moment. By the way, I do recognise again that might not always be easy, but by setting an intention, it takes you to a place that you just talked about, which is, I would like to see more. I'm going to use the example all the way through this series of podcasts. The 1982 red tractor that needs to be fixed and renovated. I want to know about other people that have fixed JCBs. By the way, I don't have a thing about tractors. I just happened to find that one.
I was just thinking perhaps at the end of all this, we should renovate a tractor.
And why not? But I do want the listener to understand that if you can just pause before you follow the next recommendation, if you can notice these patterns, particularly the escalation patterns that are going on with more curious by more novelty or more emotion, and then break out of that app, go back in, but now with a specific thing to go after, a specific thing to look at, you will start to take some control.
Yeah, and you mentioned a really key word there in terms of emotion. If you can watch, and it's hard to do, I know, but if you could be concentrating on your emotion, not the actual content. I get across by everything, as you know. But if you're sat there going, thinking, hang on a minute,
where did that come from?
Yeah. Okay, you're seeing something that has made you, angry, emotional, etc. But as long as you're conscious of that, then the natural thing to do, and what we're not saying on this episode is just stop scrolling, nice though that would be. What we're saying is just be aware of it and maybe just stop. Just step away from it.
So the reason that's important is not because everything you look at in that environment is bad. It's because if you consider it important to have some control over what you see, what you believe, what you think, then be aware these mechanisms, which are driven by economics, might be influencing it and maybe not in the direction that you care about. That's the point. If you take control, you can make a conscious decision. If you have no control or no awareness, there is no decision to make. You're just rolling along with the algorithm throwing things in front of you. But the unfortunate side effect is you're becoming potentially more and more polarized in your view, or more and more certain of something that actually isn't true. And that is about taking some control back, some agency.
Absolutely, and I think there's a collective element of this as well. I mean, most people are scrolling when they're on their own, or even if they're on the sofa with everybody else, they're still very focused. But if you can stop and just say, "Has anyone seen this?" or anything like that, and then probably somebody will, "What on earth are you on about?"
Yeah.
And that's where you go, "Oh, actually, back in the real world."
Yeah.
I mean, it's that again. That's a hard thing to do because it is quite personal what we're talking about.
It is, and I think that's actually quite a useful insight, Sean. Maybe you don't realise how powerful that is. Most people, most of the time, are scrolling in their own little world on their Black Mirror. If I were asking an individual to show me their search engine and all the searches they've done and all the topics they've paused on, would that cause them any discomfort?
Right.
And if the answer to that question is yes, it's not your fault. Maybe it's a little bit of fault there.
Yeah.
But it's the engine is doing what it's doing because it wants you to stay. And you've let it take you. Now, I have to say, most of the time I've spent on social media in recent months has all been about researching for these podcasts. And I have to tell you, out of full disclosure, God, how many hours I've spent doing it.
Indeed.
And I wonder how many of those hours have actually been productive hours versus tractor reconstructions. I do wonder, because I think the system has probably nailed me down again. It's worked out that I'm actually doing some research, and it has been throwing things at me that are more relevant to research than not.
Right.
But that actually is something I chose to do. And therefore, my search engine, if you saw it right now, would be littered with mis and disinformation studies, algorithm work, and so on. Well, I'm not afraid of being seen to do that. But if you had your search engine and your scrolling behaviors and history put in front of a unknown or even known audience, how would you feel about it? Because if the outside question is anything other than completely comfortable, discuss.
Yeah, and the most likely is quite awkward, actually. At the very least, I would suggest.
All right, let's draw this to a close, Sean. So we talked about the attention engine episode 1. We've now talked about rabbit holing, which is this escalatory part of the way the system works, again, to retain your engagement with the engine. And what we've really said here is curiosity is one of the most powerful human traits, which when animated, when activated by emotion, can get really, really escalatory. I think that's really one of the key things about rabbit hole.
And that's exactly what rabbit hole is doing, is amplifying those initial curiosity and taking it down to another level.
So if that is being steered by an attention engine, an engagement system, what we're saying is it can lead us somewhere very different from where we intended to go, or where we ever expected to go. And I think for me, that's one of those key moments that I want to convey is, fine, if you're completely happy with the random rolling around inside these topics, fine, but be aware there are some negative side effects potentially, particularly in terms of how it can steer you into places that you really, really didn't think you'd ever find yourself doing, but suddenly you are looking at something, reading something, believing something that isn't you, it's not what you wanted to do. There's an underlying mechanism that's at play that you have to understand in order maybe to restore some of your actual perspective, your own values.
Indeed. So I think we are wrapping up now. So it's my turn to say to you, what is your one key takeaway from all this?
I think for me, if I left the audience with nothing other than the accumulation of understand the attention, and you've talked about it loads now. Rabbit holing is about escalating that with emotion. It's about watching yourself, noticing how this is affecting you. If you can start to be, I think the phrase is meta-aware, aware of yourself from the outside looking in, you'll start to notice that actually I do some pretty strange things. I look at strange things. I'm driving myself along. No, I'm not. I'm being driven. I think that's the one thing I would.
Yeah, and mine would be following on from that. Actually, that awareness introduces the whole title of the podcast. That friction that we talk about now is a carefully chosen word, folks, and that friction restores our balance and in some ways our choice.
Yeah, our agency or our control.
Indeed.
You know what? I think, Sean, on the next episode we've got looking at the A/B testing. By the way, for the listener that's not aware, A/B testing is nothing more than trying two different ways of achieving the same outcome. Now, in this mechanism environment, we're talking about the so-called algorithm. It's the emotional experiments that are being run every time you open your apps on us, experiments on us, to find out what triggers us, so that the next time the app's even better at knowing how to trigger us. So, with that, thank you for listening. And we really look forward to taking you on the next step in this Fact and Friction podcast. The next one is A/B testing. Thank you. That's it for today's episode of Fact and Friction. Thank you for listening. If you found this useful, follow the podcast for more or go to our website, lumini.org.
We really would welcome any questions and feedback you might have. And if you'd like to go deeper, you'll find links to the research and the show notes in the episode description.
And as always, stay curious, question the noise, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.